Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. We know that there are a lot of things that you could be doing on this Wednesday, and we're glad that you're with us. As you're joining us today, would love to hear where you're joining us from. So I am Holly Tate. I'm in Houston today. William, you're also in Houston.
That's right.
It's very, very overcast here today and very humid. I left the house and felt like I needed to go back inside and take another shower. It's gross. And then Matt, you are in Dallas. You're representing Texas today.
I am representing Texas.
Is it hot and humid in Dallas?
It is.
What's it like there?
It's the same.
Not for
Same.
long.
Not for long. I know.
Awesome. We've got Sean from Arlington, also representing the DFW. Oh, Veronica too is from Dallas. We've got somebody from Michigan, Tamara from New York. Another Dallas, man, Chicago, Dallas, and Texas are representing. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're so glad you're here. Continue to let us know where you're joining us from. We've got Atlanta, Florida, another Chicago, San Francisco. This is awesome. We're so glad you're with us. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. So give me a thumbs up when, or actually just tell me audibly there, Matt and William, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Perfect. So today we are going to be talking all about meetings. So if you're joining this, you fall into one of two categories. You either love meetings or you hate them. So I would love to hear from you in the chat. Let us know, are you one of those people that loves meetings? Maybe you're an extrovert, you look forward to it, you love being in meetings, or are you not a fan of meetings? Let us know in the chat. Would love to hear from you. But either way,
Holly,
we are going to give you,
wouldn't the people that hate meetings just be recording this and watching it later?
Good point.
Probably. Absolutely. Yes, that is so true. Well, our goal for you today is that you walk away with practical steps to make sure that every one-on-one and every staff meeting that you lead directly contributes to an engaged and growing team. That's our goal for you today. And a bit about our agenda, what you can expect from us. We're going to do welcome and introductions. Can't wait for you to get to meet William and Matt. Then we're going to jump in with William and talk about effective staff meetings before we hand it over to Matt Tresidder to talk about effective one-on-ones. And then this is where I'm relying on you guys to make sure you've got questions. We're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Would love for you to go ahead and put those in the chat. There's also a Q&A feature here. Anna Baker from the Vanderbloemen team is going to be monitoring that. And we would love to make sure we get everybody's questions answered today. But I'm excited to introduce you. I have been looking forward to this day for so long because I've got two significant leaders in my life. And I'm so grateful, back in November when I let William know that I was going to be launching my business, the Ready Network. Cannot be more grateful for how William launched me into my business. William, thanks for making the last 4 months of my life really busy. And so I'm so grateful to be back with you today in the Vanderbloemen team and the Vanderbloemen community, talking about meetings and resourcing values-based leaders around the country. And we've also got Matt Tresidder here, who's from Leadr, which is another organization that I've been working with. And Leadr is all about people development. So we're going to be able to hear more about that in a bit. But as some of you guys know, launched the Ready Network back in November, and it's been awesome to work with so many different organizations around the country, many of which are serving churches, which is something that I love to do, resource churches to be better specifically around people. So can't wait to dive into that together today. William, I know a lot of the people on the webinar know you already. We've got some Vanderbloemen community folks and some Leadr community folks, and then probably some folks who just joined us from seeing this on social media. So William, can you give a brief introduction about you and Vanderbloemen?
Well, brief is difficult. I am a recovering preacher, so I babble, but you know that. After serving as a senior pastor for about 15 years, I went into the corporate world and saw the very large company that I was working for say that they needed a CEO succession. And then they hired this thing that I'd never heard of called a search consultant who came in and guided the process. And like 90 days later, they had their next CEO, totally seamless transition. And I just thought, man, that is not what I've seen in the church world. And, hindsight makes it clear, right? But I think now with some hindsight, I can just say I was left wondering, why does the business world have a better solution for leadership transitions than the bride? And so set out and quit my job, and Adrian and I just gotten married and blended our families and had a new house, and quit my job to start something new for churches, which Adrian pointed out, churches just love new ideas. So yeah, but that was almost 13 years ago now. And since then have had the chance to grow. Holly, you got to be a big catalyst for a lot of that growth as in your time here, and saw how we're now serving all over the world, churches of all sizes. We serve nearly all of the really large churches in the US, but more than half our work is for churches that are normal sized churches of a couple hundred people in a county seat somewhere in the middle of a state that you've never heard of. So it's a thrill and a joy to get to work with teams, on helping them find their staff, because nothing solves team issues more than having the right people. But then also working on culture and then compensation, just things that make the team have more solutions and be able to work better. And the hope is we can help the church, whether that's a school or a nonprofit or a congregation, we can help it move farther and faster by solving people problems.
That's awesome. Thanks, William. And you're so right. It's so important to get the right people on the bus so that then you can engage and grow them. And Matt, that's where you spend your time thinking about all day, every day. So tell us a little bit about you and the Leadr team.
It's true. Yeah. Well, I'm a recovering youth leader, so I have to sit on my hands so I'm not doing rah-rah and cheering and running around, the sanctuary punching holes in the wall. So I'm quietly pacing myself this morning. So I'm based in Dallas, as I mentioned, but you can probably tell I'm not from around here. I come from a place a little south of Texas called New Zealand. And my story was I joined a tech company called PushPay about 8 years ago. And I joined at a time when I think I was employee number 4 or 5, somewhere in there. And over the course of about a 5-year period, we grew to have around 500 staff, which everyone pats me on the back and cheers and congratulations. That sounds amazing. But inside looking out, we went through a lot of growing pains, and there was a lot that we did well, but there was a lot I wish I could go back and change about the way that we developed and coached and led our people. And so selfishly, Leadr came out of this place of, if I could have a better framework, a better system, I know people would have had a better version of me that time as we scaled and grew. And so I ended up having 130 people in my team. Growing from leading just me to that many was a process, we'll call it that. And we're going to talk a bit more about that today. And now, having this pleasure to lead Leadr. I mean, we're 2 years into the journey. It's a ball of fun, and getting to meet folks like William and Anna has been a real wild journey. So love it.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, William, I want to start with you today, because you wrote, and I got to be on your team when we wrote this. And I have to say, it is my favorite book that you've ever written. So I'm a little biased, but Culture Wins, the Roadmap to an Irresistible Workplace. And the reason why I bring this up is because a part of this book, especially chapter 8, you talk about infusing culture into the organization and how meetings is a big part of that. So tell us a little bit about Culture Wins, this concept, this book, what led you to write it, and how meetings are a part of those rhythms of infusing culture into the organization.
Yeah, so we had, Matt, like you, very fast growth. And with that is a lot of fun. But with that comes, I call them champagne problems. And for those of you who champagne's not in your theology, we can use sparkling grape juice, whatever you want to call it. But instead of the, oh my gosh, I am in woe and misery, cup of sorrow, it's like, these are good problems, but they're real. And one of the things that got real for us was, how do we teach people as we bring them on how we want to accomplish the vision God's given us? So we ended up, I don't even remember who signed us up originally for a best places to work survey. And as the owner of the company, I'm not able to participate, but we ended up placing really high in the city of Houston, which has more Fortune 500 headquarters than anybody besides New York. So then the next year we moved up a little. And then the next year, Entrepreneur Magazine said we had the best company culture of a small business. And then Holly had the foresight to say, why don't we write about this before we stop winning awards? Which was brilliant because we did. We wrote it and we stopped winning awards because, we grew. And as you grow, you become adolescent, your feet are too big, you bump into things, your skin's bad, all the metaphors you can imagine as you grow. And it was super helpful that we knew how we wanted to behave. So, the question was, how are you winning all these awards? Let's write a book about it. And the team we all felt like that was a little selfish to write about us. And frankly, if you look at all the books that I know about culture, where there's a great one, Work Rules, about Google. Mercedes has a good one. The Nordstrom Way is a good one. The New Gold Standard is the Ritz-Carlton's book. But it's all books about a particular company's culture and how they infuse that culture. And I was asking a bigger question of all these companies that are winning awards, are there common denominators? And then outside of the common denominators, did they have a process for figuring out what their unique culture was? So we set out and interviewed and talked to and researched about 150 companies that had won similar awards. Many of them are churches or faith-based, many of them are not. And it was amazing how many commonalities there were. So Culture Wins is this experiment and learning for us in what are the common themes of health in a culture or toxicity, and then what is the path to finding your unique culture. Culture is a buzzword for me, and there are lots of good definitions, but for me, if God's given me a vision for what we're supposed to accomplish as a company, then the culture that we're trying to live out is how we behave while we're accomplishing that vision. And that led to the book. It led to us refining our values. It helped us through a really bumpy time and continues to guide us today as we continue to learn how to get better at it.
That's awesome. Thanks, William. I really like how you define that. That might be really helpful for folks who are listening today. They're like, I've heard about culture. We have a culture, but I don't really know how to define it. It's how you behave as a team. And that is such a good thing for us to take with us today as we write down, maybe how we behave as a team right now is not how we want to behave. And sometimes your culture as it is different than what you think it should be. And defining it is a great first step to doing that. So I want to dig in a little bit, William, on specifically in chapter 8 of the book, you talk about building a culture lifestyle. So this is a part of the book where you're specifically speaking about the daily rhythms, the monthly rhythms, and the annual rhythms about the whole employee life cycle. So this is one of my favorite parts about the book, of how you've really shaped the entire, from hiring all the way to firing, or I guess we could say retiring, the experience that the employee has with your organization. So for me, meetings fit into that daily, monthly, and even annual rhythms with staff reviews. But talk to me about the all staff meeting. So how does the all staff meeting infuse culture into the organization?
Yeah, well, I'd be a little negligent to not back up just a second and say, I would venture to guess, we get hired to deal with a lot of personnel problems. The vast majority of personnel problems I've witnessed, I would say like 90% of all personnel problems are not a personnel issue, they're a hiring issue. So of all the things that happen with culture, I would say if you spend half your time hiring around your culture, then your meetings will go much better because you have a team assembled around the same values. So that's a little evasive, sorry, but before you ever get to the meetings, hire the right people. Don't just hire talent. I made that mistake as a young leader, leading a church with about 300 on staff, and I thought, I'm just going to get the most talented people that are out there. It was a disaster, partly because I was a young, arrogant, totally self-absorbed leader that did know everything, so that was kind of cool. But but what I've learned is if you can get people who have agreed to behave the same way, the same family rules, right, then meetings can go a lot better. And the first thing I noticed when we really define those values is meetings don't have to be long. We're recording this on the Wednesday before Easter. So tomorrow afternoon, we're going to drive down an hour toward the coast and go to Galveston. Yes, I know it's a dirty, nasty beach, but it's the beach. and we're going to get away because I don't have to preach 75 sermons this Sunday for Easter. And, the kids were asking what to pack. And my answer is always the same: half of what you think you need to. Like, that's the old rule your mom gave you, right? Lay out all your clothes, go put half of them away, and the half in the suitcase. Same's true for meetings. They don't have to be long if they're structured around culture. So if they're structured around outcomes. Our all staff meeting, which is once a week, it's rare that it goes longer than 30 minutes. But in every one of those meetings, one of the very first things we do, we say, where do we see our vision? Where do we see our work at work? And then right after that, we have a moment, which we totally stole from the Ritz-Carlton's management team. And we say, somebody in the rotation, maybe it's Matt this week, maybe it's Holly, they know ahead of time. It's your week to say, where did you see one of our values lived out through some of the team? And so they might say, this week I saw Matt live out the value of broadband love by coming all the way from where the Kiwi live and dealing with Texans and embracing them fully. What a great day, what a great day to see our broadband love, which is our value, alive and well. Thank you, Matt. And that way the value is the hero, never this person that's living it out. But right underneath there, the sub-hero is somebody that gets celebrated for living out that value. And you say, well, William, if you got a 30-minute meeting, you've taken 10 minutes on value and culture? Absolutely, because then everything else goes faster. So I would just say meetings don't have to be long as they're driven by principle and not time. And so many times look, I grew up Presbyterian, we meet forever. Like, we form committees to talk about how to have a committee to meet. And I just started feeling like meetings are like gas in a container. Like, you can get a big container and the same amount of gas will go in it as the small container. It just expands to fill it. So you can set a 90-minute meeting and you can make it last that long, or you can compress it, keep it around your values. And I think you'll see it's more effective and people actually kind of stay with you a little better.
Mm.
There are two things you said that really stuck out to me. The first is, in that culture part of the meeting at the very beginning, it's not about celebrating the person, they're the sub-hero. It's about celebrating that cultural value that they lived out that week. And I think that's a huge shift. Well, it's really a subtle shift, but it really has a big impact for the rest of the team. That it's because if you celebrate the individuals, typically it's the loudest people who get celebrated the most. And so what I like about this is it's highlighting the value and reminding the entire team about the why, and not just the person. So really appreciated that. And then the other thing that oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll just, pardon the interruption, but I'll just say, if you celebrate the person, and I bet Matt can attest to this too, if you get in a fast growing organization, faces change quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, every team member is an interim team member. They might stay 20 years, they might stay 1 year, but if you start celebrating people, then you got to have funerals when they leave, and you got to grieve and mourn. And yeah, I mean, we're all super sad you left. We're all super proud of you that you started your company. And, we didn't say, oh, we don't get to celebrate Holly. No, we celebrate the value. And then the sub-hero is the team member. I think that creates a lot more smoothness in an organization that will change rapidly if it's growing or if it's not growing.
I can attest to that, William. We just started doing that. 6-7 weeks ago was the very first time we started recognizing the value instead of an individual or a certain project or a certain event, and it changes the dynamic of the conversation. So I didn't know that was Ritz-Carlton. I'm still going to give you the kudos for that.
That's so good. I love it. The other thing you said, William, that I really appreciated was that the meeting should be led by principle and not by time. And that is something that I think we've all been guilty of, where we think that this meeting should be 30 minutes or an hour. And a lot of times I think it's just default to what's on our calendar, like Google Calendar default time. Really think about what needs to be covered in that meeting. Maybe it only needs to be 15 minutes, that it's about the principle and not guided by time. That was really helpful. All right, William, let's dive in a little bit more to the elements. So we talked about the cultural value moment at the beginning of the meeting. What else, as we're thinking about our all staff or all hands or all team meeting, and I'm going to add a caveat to this question as well. You mentioned that Vanderbloemen has them on a weekly basis. I know Leadr does too. Is that what you think is best? Should they be weekly? Should they be monthly? Tell us about cadence and then what should be included in those all staff meetings.
Yeah, well, I think size makes a big difference. If you're Ritz-Carlton, for instance, their sub-teams of 5 or 6 meet at the beginning of every shift. So that's different than an all staff meeting of 40 or 450 or however. So I think size determines frequency to some extent. And I would assume people don't want to see a meeting invite, and like ask yourself, okay, they don't want to see this. Do we really need to send it? Like I would say, no, we don't have meetings, don't have meetings unless we have to. What we've found for us, and we've played with it and tinkered with every other week, is once a week is really good. So we have a rhythm of travel around here. A whole lot of us are on the road, even now as we come out of this pandemic. And we've said no travel after Thursday afternoon. So that makes Friday a day where we're all together. And even if that's people working remotely or in offices that aren't located in Houston, we're all in front of a desk and we can have meetings then. So for us, that Friday meeting really works. And I have one contribution to that meeting. And if you're the senior leader of your team, I think it's on you to get this down. I'm still learning it. And that is, where did you see the vision of your company come to life in the last week? And sometimes it's a little thing, sometimes it's a big thing, but man, oh man, if ever there was a season where you have to preach the vision of your company more than ever, it's now. And some of that is driven by a whole lot of stuff we've written about what motivates Gen Z and millennials and what doesn't. A lot of it is now generated by the pandemic, where we're living in a time where people are like, man, life's more fragile than I thought it was. Things are more temporary than I ever thought they were. I better be doing something that matters. So I think it's incumbent, the single most important thing in that meeting, and the only thing that I do, is say, where did I see our work at work? And it can never, ever, leader, be something that you did, period. You cannot be the person living out the vision. It's got to be somebody else. I am learning, I've got to rotate it around. And one thing we're learning now, Holly, you might not even recognize our meetings in the next month or so, but we're going to start shaking it up where other people are leading the meeting that are not on the senior team. Other voices, a balance of gender, a balance, of diversity, just to make sure that we're not making it the William show or the William and Sutton show or whatever the two people that usually lead the company are. And so you start with vision, awesome. Immediately culture. And then for us, it's where are the outcomes that we all need to be aware of. So particularly in a year where a whole lot of people had to work remotely, assumptions are out the window. You can't assume everybody's communicating because nobody's just popping into an office saying hello. So we go over operations. All right, what are the things we all need to make sure that we know what's going on? Doesn't have to take long, but let's make sure we know what's going on. We celebrate wins. Where did we, in our work of primarily helping churches and schools and nonprofits and the Chick-fil-A's of the world build their team, where do we say, hey, let's talk about the success of the push-pay CEO search, right? That would have been one that was a big deal. We also talk about that's the rear view work we've completed. We look forward to, and not in a Pollyannish way, but to say, how are we doing on things that are about to happen? How are we doing on things we just completed? And are there any all staff announcements that need to happen? That's sort of the flow that we have, and it's very particular to our company, but we try and take pieces of each team and let them speak about outcomes that are happening, not just nice things we would like to see happen. Outcomes that are about to happen, sales that have happened, leads that have happened, very real numbers, and try and keep it pretty brief. So it moves around quickly, but always starts with vision, always followed by culture, and then into outcomes.
That's so good. Vision, culture, and then into outcomes. That's awesome. All right. That's actually a perfect transition over to Matt. And thank you guys so much for sending in your questions. We're getting a lot coming in. Keep them coming. I'm monitoring them. And there's several kind of detailed staff meeting questions that we'll come back to at the end, William. So get ready for those. But Matt, I have heard you tell this story of when you became VP of sales at a tech company and you did 40 one-on-one meetings in 10 days. That sounds like an adventure. So tell us more about that and how your passion for one-on-one meetings started.
Adventure is certainly one word for it. It's giving me a little bit of PTSD just seeing this right now. So there's one of my favorite quotes that I get a lot of comfort from is Steve Jobs. He says, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards." So at the time, I inherited a pretty toxic team. We like to throw that term around, toxic culture, toxic team. To not over dramatize it too much, there was just a lot of eroded trust between the leadership and between the frontline staff. There just was zero trust, zero relational equity. And so I was entering into that. And so at the time, I really didn't have a clear plan other than I'm going to lean on what I've always known to work, which is this idea of sitting down with people and having discipleship conversations. I said I came from a youth leadership background. Discipleship's what we know. It's what we're good at. And so I figured I'm just going to sit down and ask some questions. And so this is exactly what happened. I spent 40 one-on-ones in about a week and a half, back to back to back, all day, every day, just asking some questions like, how are you? How can I help? If you were me, what would you do? What would be your magic wand if you could wave it? What are some of the things that are causing you to fail? What are some of the things that are causing you to succeed? And just started to have conversations. And so it wasn't overnight. I'm not going to tell the story about after the 10 one-on-one, the 40 one-on-ones, immediately the culture turned around and it's no longer toxic. That's not what happened. But people started to feel heard, which I thought was the first time they'd felt that in a long, long time. They felt ignored previous to that. And then the other thing that started to happen is that we began to build that trust back up again. And so slowly but surely, it took a few months ultimately, but slowly but surely, we managed to build it back up again.
That's awesome. Let's first define one-on-one, because that's a term that maybe if you're a leadership junkie, you might have heard of like, oh yeah, one-on-one before. What do you mean when you say a one-on-one meeting?
Well, that's a good clarification as well, because a lot of people, when they think one-on-one, they also might think that HR is present, right? You get that, hey, 4 o'clock on a Friday, I've got a meeting with my manager and oops, HR's in the room. I wonder what this is going to be about. That's not a one-on-one. A one-on-one is a consistent, frequent conversation where I'm sitting down with my direct reports or my peers, and I'm having the tactical, the relational, and the development conversations that need to happen on an ongoing basis. So it could be, here's the laundry list of things that we need to talk through. Here's the things that you need approval on. Here's the things you need advice on. Or it just could be, how are you? How's the family? How's things at home? Or it could be, hey, I've got some feedback for you. Here's some things that I'd like to see you grow and improve. Here's an example from last week. Why don't you try this next week? And so there's a mixture of past, of present, and future. But I think the key is the consistency. It has to be a frequent, ongoing cadence, because the once a quarter check-ins or just meeting for the annual reviews, that just doesn't quite cut it.
So good. So one thing that I have heard you say is that the one-on-one meeting is the most effective leadership development tool that a leader has. This is a big statement. So tell us more about that and why you believe this is true.
I think when you think about even just the fact that someone is taking the time to sit down with you, regardless of the content, regardless of the agenda, regardless of what's being discussed, the fact that there's a sacred time, if you want to call it that, every week where I get to meet with the person that I trust, respect, and admire, that just says a lot. It shows that you're valued. It shows that you're heard. It shows that you have a place in the organization. It shows that you're not just a cog in the wheel. And so investing into those one-on-ones, I've just seen time and time again, when we take the time to prepare, when we take the time to have maybe the uncomfortable, maybe the awkward conversations, we're just better off for it. And you can't have those conversations in a team meeting. I've tried to do that before, where maybe there's a cultural disconnect with one individual, or maybe it's a performance thing with one individual. And you try and have that conversation at a team level. Do you know what happens? Everybody thinks they're doing a bad job. And actually, it's the people that are doing the best job. They're the ones that have the most EQ. They're the ones that actually feel like they're doing the worst. And then the people that you wanted to get that message across to, they don't have the EQ potentially. So they think they're doing great. So the top performers walk out of the meeting going, oh my gosh, I feel terrible. And the bottom performers walk out of that meeting going, I wonder who that was about. That definitely wasn't me. So we have to point those conversations towards the one-on-one. That's been my experience.
Matt, I'll just add a value that I'm learning of the one-on-ones, and I'm sure you've seen this and can speak to it, but I have one direct report now, and we have our weekly one-on-one on Thursdays prior to our Fridays. I can't tell you the amount of time that saves me to know, and it saves him. So I'm not pestering Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with every little thing. I just add it to the list. And unless it's urgent, it comes up on Thursday. And it's so much more efficient in an age of chatting and instant communication and email everything. Man, it has saved my bacon and probably kept Sutton from quitting, because I would bother him every 5 minutes or something.
I couldn't agree more.
That's so good.
I've definitely tended towards that. Oh, there's a problem, text somebody. Oh, there's a problem, Slack it, email it, call. It's dysfunctional. It doesn't scale.
So on that note, Matt, talk to us about the elements of an effective one-on-one meeting. There are probably 2 different types of leaders that are on this call. You probably have your very relational leader that's got an open door policy that walks by with a cup of coffee in their hand and says, "How you doing?" and counts that as a one-on-one with their team members. And then you've probably got the other end of that spectrum that is very organized, always has an agenda, shows up early for the meeting, and it is always on time. So talk to me about what elements should be included in an effective one-on-one meeting.
Yeah, that's a good scale to think about. There's the best friend leader, and then there's the highly tactical, let's just get stuff done leader. I tend to be this side of the coin, but it's a really good question. I think the first answer to this question is an answer not a lot of us like to admit, but the biggest key, the best way that we can have effective one-on-ones is an agenda. Without a clear agenda, without a concrete list or even a loose list of things that we want to discuss, it can be too easy to get into a room. I know I'm not the only one on this call that's gone into a meeting and we're all sitting down and we're like, right, so what should we talk about? That doesn't work. And so I got a funny story about this actually. So a good friend of mine was a volunteer at a church for about 6 or 7 years, and he eventually moved to going on staff. And he called me ahead of the first one-on-one that he was having with his executive pastor, who he'd known for the full 6 or 7 years. They had a good relationship. And he called me and he said, "Hey, I'm really nervous heading into this meeting." I was like, "Why? You've known Pastor so-and-so for 6 or 7 years. Like, I know you guys get along great." He said, "No, I'm really nervous because I have no idea what we're going to talk about." There's something about walking into a conversation, whether you've worked with someone for years, especially for folks you maybe put on a pedestal, good, bad, or otherwise, but when we look up to somebody and we're walking into a room and we have no idea what's going to be discussed, the first thing that I felt that happens is walls go up, barriers go up, and there's a sense of anxiety and a sense of discomfort. So one thing that agendas do is they actually break down the walls. And I've actually found that an agenda allows you to be more relational, because you're able to get through the tactical things quickly and then able to move on to maybe the more development side or the relational side of one-on-ones. So that would be the first one. And I think it is the most important. And then the other things, the other aspects that should be in there is things like goals. William mentioned it when it came to the all hands, but the outcomes. What are we working on this week? What's most important for right now? And how can I help? How can we move faster? What's slowing you down? How can I get things out of your way? Those sorts of questions. Feedback, I touched on that a little bit already, but I think it's really important. I think we should assume that no one else is going to provide feedback to our direct reports. And so the onus is on us to do it, which is an uncomfortable position to be in, but we have to provide the feedback. We don't want to get to the annual review at the end of the year and they're hearing all of this feedback for the very first time. And then the third one would be maybe a level of content. Hey, I was thinking about you as I was listening to this podcast, or I was thinking about you as I was reading this book, or I just listened to this sermon series, check it out. Have a read about it, and let's talk about it next week in our one-on-one. I think those 4 elements, agendas, goals, feedback, and assigning a level of content, I think all those things really help.
So good. And if you are feeling overwhelmed by and like taking notes and writing all of this down, because maybe you have realized, oh man, like I am that leader that's stopping by with an open door policy and checking in on my team, but not sitting down and having a more structured one-on-one. At the end of the webinar, we've got 2 resources for you that I'll share with you. One is a guide to getting started with a one-on-one by the Leadr team, because that's what Leadr does. It's literally a software that helps you have amazing and effective one-on-ones. And then we also have a resource from the Vanderbloemen team that's all about effective staff meetings that work. So hang on, we'll be able to show you where you can access those at the end. That's so good, Matt, about having an agenda, especially for leaders who are more relational. Having that agenda can sometimes feel like it's putting them in a box, but to your point, to serve your direct report really well, to realize that if I put a calendar invite in the calendar and they have no idea what this is about, they're probably going to assume the worst. So to be able to have that consistent one-on-one where not only are you diving into the tactical things that need to be talked about, but also being relational and building trust with your team members on a weekly basis is key. That's so good. Okay, so as we're thinking about one-on-ones, there's probably leaders that have never done them before on this webinar, and there's some that are having them consistently. What are the cautions that you would give? What are mistakes that you've made, or maybe you've seen leaders make around one-on-ones? What should we avoid with one-on-ones?
I've made every mistake under the sun, I can assure you. And one of them, and this is the one that I continue to fall into the trap of, because you mentioned earlier, Holly, there's this scale, and I'm definitely on that highly tactical side. I just want to get things done. I want to get things moving. I want to keep focusing on the outcomes. And so what I tend to do is I tend to drift towards purely focused on the delivery of goals. And so what that means is, as my projects pile up on my laundry list, as my projects move up my list, people can move down. And I've fallen into the trap of being surrounded by upcoming deadlines or an upcoming event. Like we've got Easter this weekend. And the first thing that I always sacrificed on my agenda, on my calendar looking up to the week, was my one-on-ones. And I justified it. I'd say things like, oh, working with Holly, she's great. She's a team player. She gets it. She's part of the mission. She'll be fine. And I justified it. I'm like, this thing's more important. And you do it once and you do it twice, maybe it doesn't have an immediate impact, but there is a trailing effect to that, because the message I'm sending is essentially, this thing that I'm working on is more important than someone. This project, this task is more important than the individual. Now, that's not what I'm saying necessarily, but that's what people are hearing. And so I've been pretty strongly convicted about keeping a level of consistency and a level of frequency with my direct reports, and just trying to make that a priority, no matter what happens, no matter what becomes chaos and gets on fire this week. And I'm sure we all live in those environments where there's a fire bursting every day. No matter what, I'm going to hold to this meeting and I'm going to hold to the conversation, because it sends a message. So that would probably be my biggest caution. Don't make the trade-off between projects over people, and don't make the trade-off of letting your people know that that meeting is expendable, because then they'll feel expendable.
That's so good. I think the inclination, especially for more tactical leaders, are, we don't really have anything to talk about. That project's been done, so let's just go ahead and cancel this week. But to really, what you just said is so critical, is putting people over projects. Because William, you said this at the beginning, is when you focus on culture or people development, everything else takes care of itself. That's the most important thing. And so that's really helpful for us to hear. All right, well, we got lots of questions coming in. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other and dive into some questions here. So Anna, keep them coming as people are typing them in. The first one is, this is from a small staff. So William, I'll hand this to you first. The question is, does your all staff meeting deal with the nuts and bolts of things? We're a small staff, so we always dig into the details of work. So if you're a small team, how should your all staff meeting look when it comes to dealing with the nuts and bolts of things that need to get done that week?
Yeah, so this is so contextual, and you've heard me say, we bring new people into the team, and I'll tell them, look, we've done 2,000 searches. I've seen thousands of churches. And let me just tell you, if you've seen one church, you've seen about one church, and that's it. So I don't know what this particular person's question, the context of the question is, but I would say that universally, I think the meetings will go better if you'll follow that old Stephen Covey rule of just beginning with the end in mind. What do I want to think? What do I want the team to know? And how do I want them to feel after the meeting is over? I always leave out the feeling part, right? I always like task, and I forget to say, you know what, by the way, you're actually doing a really good job. So like, what do you want them to think? How do you want them to act? And how do you want them to feel at the end of the meeting? And that might answer your question. Because if church meetings can quickly devolve into, did you hear how Susie is complaining that we don't have an American flag in the sanctuary? And then we have the other people who think we should, and you end up in this giant fight, and it takes all your time, and you forgot, oh, by the way, Sunday's Easter. So, the tyranny of the urgent is what happens on church staff so many times. And I think if you can enter the meeting saying, begin with the end in mind. For instance, with us, one of the areas we've tried to work on that we really need to keep working on is people development and continuing education. Well, that's really important. Like we serve literally hundreds of kinds of churches, and we need to be constantly studying what that means. And that's great, but that doesn't belong in an all staff. So we have continuing education events, and we begin with the end in mind for that. One-on-ones, I'd say the same thing. How do you want people to, what do you want them to know? How do you want them to act? How do you want them to feel by the end of the meeting? Let that drive the agenda. And to me, if you can focus on the things that are not urgent, but super important, the stuff that seems really urgent will begin to fall in scale and won't appear quite as big as it might on the front end.
So good. All right, Matt, how long is an effective one-on-one? And what's the max number of one-on-ones that of oversight that someone should have to sustain excellence?
Good questions. Well, I think how long is a one-on-one is almost like how long is a piece of string. It determines who you're meeting with. It determines how complex their role is and how many things are on their list. One rule of thumb could be the meeting is as long as it needs to be. If you run through your list, if you're on the same page, if you're aligned, if you talk through goals and feedback and you've run through all your laundry items, you don't need to sit in the room and take up the time. And conversely, if there's a long list of things that you have to cover and you get to the top of the 30 to 40 minutes and you need more time, I think that's okay too. For me, it's making sure that the meeting's effective. So it's not effective, try and find ways to make it more effective, but if it's becoming effective, then that's a good thing. You don't need to stay in the room to play out the calendar time. And then how many is too many? Was that the second question, Holly, for a manager?
Yep. Yes, for a manager.
Yeah, Amazon calls it the pizza slice model. If you have more than 8 slices of pizzas in a box, it's a weird pizza. I guess that works. And I think that also depends on, again, the complexity of the people that you're leading. If they have a lot on their plate, if you're leading campus pastors, for example, it's going to be hard for you to have 8 campus pastors because there's a lot of moving dynamics in their roles. But if you're leading maybe a volunteer team, you could probably manage up to the 8, maybe even up to the 10. So I think that's a determining factor. And then I think it's just a gut check. As you head into each week, do you have a good question to ask ourselves is, do I have the capacity to give all of my people what they need? And if there's a capacity question there, and if you don't have the capacity, maybe it's a growth area for us, but maybe it requires a shrinking of your direct reports and maybe a split of responsibilities. And I'd actually be really curious.
Or you need to.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Holly.
Sorry. I was going to say, or you need to hire somebody and you should call Vanderbloemen.
There you go. Yeah, full circle. I like it. Well, I was going to ask William, you mentioned one direct report. So talk me through that. I'm curious.
Yeah, well, it's grown and shifted over the years. And I would just say, I'd back the truck up a little bit, and not to play counterpoint with you, Matt, but I'm guessing there are a lot of pastors right now on Wednesday afternoon that still don't know what they're going to say on Sunday. And it's Easter. And like, in terms of put the big rocks in the jar first, your job as a pastor is to feed the people God's word. And that doesn't apply to headmasters of schools and CEOs of nonprofits. And like, if you're just CEO, and there's no just CEO, but if that's your job, you've got a lot more capacity to handle a span of care. In my view, preaching pastors, it's very uncommon to find somebody that can handle more than a span of care of 5. Now, if you're an executive pastor and you don't have the burden of preaching, then maybe it's different. And maybe you're one of those that preaching comes so naturally that it doesn't matter. But I just don't like first importance in whatever your role is, and then let span of care be backed out from that. For me, we started, it was really cool when we started, because I started the company. And so a staff meeting was me looking in the mirror saying, well, what do you think about that? And that one-on-one went really well every single week. It was amazing. We had unanimous votes. It was awesome. As we grew, we got to where we had I remember when Holly finished her first full year with us, doing an annual review, and I was like, what bonus are we going to give? And I was talking to Adrian, my wife, who I totally lean into, help me start the company and helps with big decisions. And I said, what do you think we ought to do for Holly this year? And she said, we need to put her on your leadership team. And I said, well, that's kind of funny. We don't have a leadership team. And she said, well, you need to form a leadership team and put Holly on the leadership team. So we did. And that was the birth of a new phase for us, where I had reports. And for a while, it was just everybody. Then it was like, I can't do more than about 5. That's my span of care. So there you go. Now we've entered a new season where I am sort of constantly focused on succession. And that's not just for our clients, but every leader is an interim leader. And so for me, I want this ministry to the larger universal church to far outlive me. And so I have tried to make a concerted effort over the last 3 years to say, every year, I have one question on my annual review, pass, fail. Did I make myself less essential to the growth and maintenance of the firm? That's just the stage of life we're in. Unfortunately, it's proving to be a whole lot easier than my ego would like for me to be unnecessary, but that's a different webinar. So I've whittled it down to one direct report. He has an amazing bandwidth, Harvard Business School grad, ran a ministry that was much larger than here, and it works for us for now.
That's good. Okay, we've got so many good questions. I have one question that I want each of you to answer. William on the all staff side, Matt on the one-on-one side. I love this because the question is, do one-on-one and staff meetings need to change if everyone's remote? But I would add to that, a lot of organizations are now doing hybrid. So we've got, previously, I feel like it was before COVID, it was like, we're all remote or we're all in person. And now we have a lot of organizations that are doing both, which is a whole nother dynamic. So William, how would you answer that on the all staff side of how to lead all staff meetings well when everyone's remote?
I don't think you can. How's that?
You're a big fan of the in-person. Yeah.
I was having a really good talk with Pearl, my dog, earlier today. And she hurt her leg running around the pool with the teenagers over the weekend. And she just came up to me looking all pitiful. And I just said, I bet you don't want me to pet you over Zoom, right? It's just not the same. I'm sorry. It's not the same. So what does that mean other than the trite, it doesn't work answer? It means you got to work twice as hard at relationships that are not face-to-face. And that might mean twice as much time and twice as much attention and rules for shutting down. Like I've got y'all full screen right now, because if I don't have you full screen, then I'm going to see my Slack come through and I'm going to see a text come through and I'm going to see this and that. It requires more attention and focus to do remote, not less. And I think I've said it for the last years, but for the last 13 months, the first thing God curses, which is an interesting question. What's the first thing? He said, it's not good. It is not good that humans be left alone. So when we're remote, it's like trying to pet a wounded dog remotely. You ever try and hold a sick baby over Zoom? It doesn't work. Try and care for your staff over Zoom. It's going to take more work than if you were in person.
Matt, what about you for one-on-ones?
Yeah, and to double click on that piece too, it's this balance between when we were face to face, things flowed easier. And then when we went full remote last year, we had to really work at it. And now we're in this hybrid where we have a mixture of both, and you have to be even more intentional, because what I found, we came back to the office about 3 weeks ago. And what I found is it's really easy to just forget about everyone online. It's really easy to forget that half of the team is on the Zoom call. And so you have to be way more intentional. At least I do. I've had to be way more intentional than I've been in the past, because I think to your earlier point, Holly, you don't have the organic hallway conversations like you would with everybody that's here in the office. And so it's easy for people to feel left out. So one-on-ones, I think William nailed it. The thing that I've had to do is shut off all the other things that are happening on my screens, because it was so easy for me to be on a Zoom one-on-one, but also doing all my emails and my Slacks. And this is great. I can multitask and do all my meetings. Not a good look. Wouldn't recommend it. And then I think the other thing is, once again, about intentionality. I think the onus becomes on us to make those meetings even more engaging, more productive, and more effective, because again, you have to overexert yourself in a remote environment to get the same result if you were face-to-face. So things like happy hours, having coffee together in the mornings over a Zoom, small things like that can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add an answer into this, because I've gotten to be in both organizations' meetings with a hybrid approach. And one thing that I think you've both done well in the meetings that I've been a part of, where some team members are remote, is using technology. So get your tech stack set up. A lot of times technology can be the biggest barrier to having a successful hybrid meeting, because it's so frustrating when you go into that meeting and Zoom's not working, or you can't hear, or you can't see the people. And Vanderbloemen uses a thing called Owl, which is awesome, where it's a really great speaker and has a 360 video on the top, so it can pick up whoever's in the room so that people on the screens can see that. And then Leadr has invested a lot into technology as well in their all staff meetings. So I know you guys prefer in person, but I do think you're doing things well, both of you as CEOs, in involving both your remote and in-person employees for their all staff meetings.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things that we made that was a small sort of deal but made a big impact was we just put a screen out with everybody's faces. So we had the slides and then everyone's faces that are on the screen. And that intentionality just made us remember, okay, there's other people that aren't in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. We've got 10 minutes left. Great questions. Matt, this one is for you. While all staff meetings shouldn't have a predetermined time to fill, should one-on-ones be consistent in a time frame to ensure that it's sacred protected? So you already answered the question, Matt, about how long they should be, but talk about, should they be at the same recurring time every week? Should it be different every week with your one-on-ones?
That's good. I think, and back to the time piece, I think 30 minutes is fine. I think 60 minutes is fine. I think somewhere in the middle there, whatever seems to work for you works. And then in terms of the time of the week, I like to get it all done at the beginning of the week. I like to start my week on Mondays and everyone to have really clear understanding and have clarity about what's important for the week. And then we just go out and do our things. And then the trick that I've had to learn is, instead of on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, they have questions that come up about, what are we doing? I have to wait. I can't just disrupt the fact that we met on Mondays and now I want to talk again on Thursday and Friday. If it's not urgent, it can often wait until the next week. So for that reason, a lot of people do the midweek. You start the week with your all hands and then you have your midweek one-on-ones. And then for the same reason, you could do it at the end of the week. Hey, how did we do? What was the review for the week that had just gone? I did one-on-ones on Friday once and I realized that no one wanted to be in the room, including me. By Friday, I've just run out of juice. I don't have anything else to give. And so I think by Monday, I'm the best version of Matt. And so that's how I've decided to do it. I just stack them all day, every day on Mondays.
That's good. Hey, William, this next one is for you. Tyler's asking, how would you deal with the person who thinks they don't need to be at the all staff meeting? They have more important things to do. I feel we have a good meeting structure and content similar to what you have mentioned, but they still don't seem to see the value.
You know, the older I get, the more jaded I get. Y'all are all going to think there's no way this man's going to heaven. You know, if they don't want to be at all staff, that's fine. Turn in your staff badge. Sorry, you're either on the team or you're not. And I got like zero patience for that. So it's entitled, it's bratty, and I think there's no place for it on a functional team. How's that?
Yeah, no, I was about to say, it sounds like a culture issue, which you said, William, goes back to hiring. At the very beginning of this, you said it all goes back to hiring. And
there's a great article that you can probably still find from a friend of mine who used to write for the New York Times. And the title's just worth the article. It's like, what do you do with the brilliant jerk? What a great title. Because like every organization has the sales guy or whatever who really makes the rain and then doesn't have time for anybody. You know, I'm in the middle of the Ted Lasso thing since it won all the awards I'm watching, and you know,
so good.
The forward, you know, what's his last name? Well, you know who I'm talking about, the young forward. And he's just a total rear end, but he scores all the goals. What do you do with that? I think you have to cut it out and say no. You don't want to be at the meeting? Fine. You don't need to be on the team.
Yeah, that's so good. You're getting lots of amens and thank yous in the chat, William. So
my old
so good.
Holly, my old boss used to say to me, if I have to choose between you and culture will win every time.
That's good.
Pretty well said.
Yes, so good. William, here's another one for you. For a church staff of 40, what's the ideal frequency of staff meetings? We currently do quarterly for 1 hour and 45 minutes, but should it be more frequent and shorter?
Yeah, so I have
they do a quarterly
questions.
1 hour and 45 minutes. Yeah.
Is it 40? And like, here are your questions, like how homogenous is your team? That'll determine how frequently you need to meet. Like some staffs with 20 of them work for the preschool, 10 of them work for the church, and 10 of them work at the nonprofit that's in the community center that's in the back building. That's an entirely different thing than 40 that are all on the church staff. Is it 40 on a church staff that is in a single physical location, or are there 3 sites? Like, that's going to change things. I think the farther out a ministry spreads, the more frequently the staff has to be together. Does that make sense? Like, Life Church is relentless in their meetings because they're spread over, I think they're now in actually 51 states, even though we only have 50. They're like more than everywhere. So like but they're just ruthless in saying we're going to have meetings, because the farther out they spread, the more we realize we need to shine bright from home. So ask yourself, like, how much are we naturally around each other? And if you're all in the same building all the time and you're working on the same things, it may not be necessary to meet every single week. And you know what? It may change from time to time. I think your one-on-ones, not just frequency, but length. I think Matt is so right. There's not a right answer. But for me, what I'm trying to learn and having to figure out is different members of my team need different forms of communication. Like, if I'd see Holly Tate on my caller ID, I'd know I can do this call in 5 minutes and she won't be offended, and that's fine. Same with meetings, right? But if I saw the sweet, sensitive person on our staff who's caring and all about compliance, or a finance director, like, I better just set aside enough time to do relationship with the sensitive person and enough time for it to be right with the finance person. And that might take hours and it might take 5 minutes. So to me, I'm trying to become a student of how God's wired my team so that I can shape my one-on-ones in a way that they're going to receive communication in the way that's most natural to them, so that I'm serving them.
William, wouldn't
Yeah,
the easiest answer just to be get more Hollies? Wouldn't that make everything easier?
That's terrifying. Lots of Hollies is terrifying.
I have my little blocks right here, Matt. This is how I'm wired. And
that's true. Yeah.
If you do, this is kind of like DISC, but the top one is my top wiring. And how do you communicate with me? Be brief, be bright, be gone.
Yeah.
1 minute's good. I'm fine with that, but not true for everybody.
Right. True. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Last one, Matt. I know you're a Lencioni fan. So Patrick Lencioni, in his Death by Meeting, says it's hard to do tactical and strategic thinking in the same meeting. I've heard some comments here about tactical and developmental content in the same meeting. Do you think it's best to keep those types of thinking in separate meetings, or can they work together in the same meeting effectively? Would this mean that tactical meetings don't need an agenda, but strategic meetings do? I feel like this is like one of your favorite questions, Matt.
Love that question. Yeah, Lencioni has a really good distinction between those two. And he even mentioned sometimes it is really hard to make that transition. So he would often say, it's okay to say, all right, I'm taking off my tactical boss hat and I'm putting on my leader I care about you hat. He actually does the motions in the room, because it's really hard to make the jump. And I think what often people think when we open with relational is, oh, it's coming. They're going to give me the crap sandwich. They're buttering me up, and then they're going to give it to me strong, and then they're going to say I did a great job, and I'm going to leave confused. And so I think it's super important to distinguish the purpose of the conversation. And if we don't have it in us to do that, if we can't go hot and cold, then have 2 meetings. And you might not even be adding more time. If your one-on-one conversation is 60 minutes, just have 2 30-minute conversations. And I think it goes back to what William said. Some people on your team will need that and others won't. There are some folks on my team that if I spent time talking about the weekend plans and how's family doing, they're going to be rolling their eyes at me. But I do that with other people, and they're like, they don't even want to get onto the work stuff until I've got through the weekend plans, and that's okay.
So good. Well, William and Matt, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I know this was so helpful to so many leaders. We got great feedback in the chat and on questions. Thank you guys for joining us, especially the week before Easter. We know you've got a lot on your plate. We are praying for you and cheering you on. Here's 2 resources. So everybody that registered today, you're going to get both of these in a follow-up email along with the recording and the slides for today's talk. You'll see here, you can email me at my Leadr email address, holly.tate@leadr.com. We're going to send you the guide to conducting one-on-one meetings. You can also request a demo of Leadr, which is a people development tool. And the heart of it is that one-on-one meeting. So our team at Leadr would love to show that to you. And then on the Vanderbloemen side, Anna at Vanderbloemen, thank you, Anna, for all your hard work behind the scenes and monitoring our questions today. We are going to send you the comprehensive checklist for staff meetings that work. You can also email Anna for any questions about that. And if you are looking to add a team member to your staff, or you're thinking about succession planning or compensation, anything to do with best practices around building your team, definitely reach out to the Vanderbloemen team. They're one of my favorite teams, as I worked on the team for 8 years. So William, so excited for you guys, and Matt, for you guys at Leadr and all you guys are doing to build effective teams. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great day and Easter week.